Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
Greetings, and thank you for joining me, Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. You can listen to us live on air or online at any of your wonderful podcast venues such as iHeartRadio, Odyssey, TuneIn app, smart speakers, and our own nccradio.org or our WHPC app, which you can download at any time. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. Today, my guest is Jacob Cooper. Jacob is passionate about promoting healing. He is the best-selling author of the book Life After Breath and The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. He is a sought-after speaker about grief, wisdom, and consciousness, and offers meditation and mindfulness seminars to help others find purpose and overcome fears of life after death. As a clinical social worker, Reiki master, and certified hypnotherapist specializing in past life regressions, Jacob uses his extensive personal and professional experience to empower one soul at a time. So thank you so much for being our guest today, Jacob.
Oh, what an honor, Ellen, for having me here on your show. Thank you.
Now, what made you follow the path on a professional level to become a clinical social worker?
Yeah, I think there's certain factors within my own family. I come from 3 generations of social workers, my grandmother, my father, and myself. So it was always in my family that, to be the value of being a giver in life and how significant that was. So that was really, influenced to me from a very early age. But, to me, other factors as well, too. Having a profound near-death experience at a young age certainly put me at a different track to understand that life really was not so much about taking, but rather was about really giving. And so having a near-death experience, which we'll get into, had my life taken away essentially, and my goal is really to give back life to others in a indirect kind of way when they're feeling out of sorts.
Well, so you mentioned now a life after death experience, and actually there's a lot written about that. I would say over the years that has become a fairly recognized phenomena on many levels. But tell us about your experience.
Yeah, I really credit my friend Dr. Ray Mahmoudi, who coined the term near-death experience, in the 70s, and he worked in academia, and he was very daring to, really use a lot of research on this stuff and recognize this as a real phenomenon. But for myself, I was born and raised in Long Island, and I had a near-death experience at just the age of 3 years old. At the time, I had pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough, and I went to a playground with family friends and climbed a ladder onto a slide, and I just began to, suffocate as a result of pertussis and whooping cough. And once everything, was taken from me, which really makes us aware in this body is our breath. And once I was suffocated, I just kind of surrendered to this whole new breath, and that's the breath that I know now is the breath of eternity and our essence, what we're created from. And when I was able to surrender this and let go of the trauma and suffering, from suffocation, that's when, everything opened. But, part of my brain, I just remembered, at the time was deprived of oxygen, and I just felt this large kind of snap and crack in half in my brain, due to the deprivation of oxygen. And once my brain cracked open, that's when the spirit realm and God came in, as the saying goes. And so this was a full-blown experience that really gave me a wider panoramic viewpoint of all the things that are in each and every one of us that sometimes we have our blinders on or amnesia about. But I was, able to connect to, the angelic realm, my guardian angels, soul family members. I was aware of past lives. Became aware of, God, but that's has a lot of religious connotation to it. So the word does not do justice, but also the fact that we all have a soul's purpose. And I was, with many near-death experience encounters, were usually given an opportunity to either stay and continue your life, or you're told that it's not your time. For myself, I was given autonomy as to what I would do if I would continue my life, in the other side, or I would continue my work, in this body. And, I chose obviously to stay. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here talking to you. So just a fascinating experience that forever changed the trajectory of my life. But more importantly, allowed myself to remember all the things that are always inside of each and every one of us at our core.
So many people really do describe a similar situation. But how old did you say you were?
It's very thought-provocative to some, but I was just 3 years old.
You were 3. And you know what? Since we are in the studios of WHPC in Garden City, New York right now, what Long Island community did you live in?
Well, I grew up in Merrick early on when I had this experience.
Very close.
Very close. And then, shortly after this, I moved to West Hempstead, and that's where I grew up. But ironically enough, I'm actually a Nassau Community College graduate.
Wow, thanks for the shout out.
I started my NCC career at the lowest possible remedial courses for reading and writing, and I've managed to write 2 best-selling books that were published, by major publishers. So I really credit, though, the writing centers of Nassau Community College that really helped me, to gain confidence, and, it was just, we're always there. Any paper that I had, any assignment, I was in that writing center the first second that I had availability. So my professors really were great, and they gave me the confidence that, I could succeed. And, I got all A's there. I went to Adelphi, finished there, and got my graduate and master's degree within social work. And I'm a 2-time best-selling author, and I started at the lowest possible remedial course within the college. So if I can do it, anyone can.
What inspirational message right here for, of course, our audience is now actually international, but we're broadcasting right out of Nassau Community College.
NCC,
So that's interesting. And I've been doing this show now for 35 years out of this studio. So I wanted to touch base with you about what happened physically. Obviously, you said you had this incident. Were you taken to the hospital?
I was rushed to the hospital. I was in the hospital. Yeah, this was incredibly traumatizing. My parents weren't there, so they had to rush, to get me. And I always ask my parents, how long, was I out, and stuff like that. But, everyone around me was just so traumatized by it that, when you're traumatized, you don't look at your wristwatch. There was timeless. But I was really helped by the medical staff, within the hospital. Went to a local Long Island hospital. But I just remembered, being on the ground, when I suffocated, and how people around me were calling my name. And I felt a form next to my body, that I was able to hear and see and know their thoughts, but they couldn't see me. And this just reminds me how the body is just a vehicle of our lives, but we are an infinite spiritual being in this physical reality, that, there's a greater part of ourselves beyond the body and beyond the brain, which does really go against conventional material, reductionism, which basically says if you take your body and your brain away, you are nothing. And so near-death experience fascinate many, and they put kind of like the old medical and scientific community with a lot of questions, that are unanswered from their end.
And it's great that you have such a clear memory of it, even of being just a child of 3. Do you recall any kind of feeling, like so many people who experience this do, of floating above your body and being able to watch the scene below? Yes,
I do remember that. What the funny thing is, this to me feels like just yesterday. I couldn't, and I spoke to my parents, later on. I probably had 2 decades of just keeping this to myself. But my father told me, shortly after I had my NDE and I was rushed to the hospital, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, but I said, "Hey, Dad, something happened to me that day. One day it will make sense to you, but right now it will not." And, but something, profound happened. And, so it's just nice to kind of put some of the pieces of the puzzle back together and get some of those pieces of evidence. But the greatest way I could describe it is in our body, we're kind of bio-neurochemicals. So we just almost have a limit of how good we could feel in a way. But when you're out of the body, there's no limitations with the euphoria that you feel. And so the feeling that I had was just an endless time, is also an endless euphoric experience where there's no capacity with how euphoric I felt. I can't describe it in words with how high and how good I felt, from being on the other side.
Do you remember the moment, again, that is often described, where you were taken to the hospital? Obviously, that's a life-saving intervention, although you still might have had, like you said, an autonomous choice. When your spirit is in the other realm, do you want to go back into that body or not? So you felt that you actually had some kind of say in terms of whether you regained consciousness or not.
Moments later, after I made my decision that I would stay, that's when I woke up in a hospital bed.
Right, exactly.
Moments later, and that's the very powerful snippet that the power of decision, the power of choice, is so pivotal in our lives. How our thoughts and our perceptions and our decisions influence the reality that we live in our path. But for myself, people ask me all the time, "Why did you decide to stay?" And I had, a premonition. I had premonitional visions. Kind of like if you're watching a movie, but this movie has a wide panoramic viewpoint of not only what you did in the past, which is called a life review, which I had, that included past lives, but also
not much by 3, right?
but I'll get to but also what I would be doing in this life, and I was able to see a lot of people that I was helping out and speaking to, and so in that moment I said, I can't turn this down. The ability to give this over to others, is creating heaven on earth, and heaven will always be there, but the unique window to bring this down to earth makes the other side not other, but makes it on this side.
Well, that's a beautiful statement. Now, you have 2 books, Life After Breath and The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. And I love the name of that, seeing as you yourself are Jacob. And let me just reintroduce you here at this juncture, because I'd like to remind you, listeners, that you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. You can listen line or online at any podcast venue, including nccradio.org or iHeartRadio. For more information on today's guest or topic, you could always email us at whpc@ncc.edu. In addition, we archive all our shows. So if you hear something that interests you, you want to listen to it again, or you want to tell your friend, they can always catch it again on the archives of any podcast venue. And there we will have links to how you can easily find Jacob's books. But in terms of the 2 books, Life After Breath and The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, what's different about the 2 books?
It's a good question. I mean, in spirituality, people are familiar with the terms karma, and some maybe a little bit familiar with the term dharma. But to me, karma is our story. And so Life After Breath is more of my memoir, my story of having this near-death experience, but also what life was like after that and how I was able to make sense of the puzzle. And so it's kind of like Pablo Picasso. The purpose of life is to, the gift of life is really to find your purpose, and the meaning of it is to give your way, something like that. I'm kind of paraphrasing. So really, once I was able to make sense of it all, I was really able to kind of step into my own power. But the wisdom of Jacob's Ladder is more my dharma. That's more my meaning and my purpose of my NDE. So really, it's a guidebook and a lesson book of, you kind of think of a ladder, bringing, the top rungs of the ladder down to the ground. So you're bringing the hereafter, the wisdom of the hereafter into the here now. And so my goal is for people, when they hopefully read this book, to have some degree of familiarity, with what I experienced, but also, to learn that we don't have to wait. We don't have to have an NDE, to remember our eternity. We don't have to die to fully live and be aware of our eternal infinite conscious, that we could have these things, remember these things, and integrate these things in our everyday life.
Well, that's why people often go through a process, and usually with a professional who guides them, in past life regression. Because although they haven't had that out-of-body experience or near-death experience, they can often have a past life regression, which allows them to actually connect, which also gives them, which you probably experience, a very peaceful feeling moving forward.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it has a term past, but I find past life regression has the ability to move our lives forward. By that I mean, when people experience past life regression, they're able to go into different lifetimes. They just remember, they're able to transform a faith of the eternity of the soul into a knowing, that the soul does not die. And through past life regressions, they recognize they have many deaths and many lives, but there's eternity past the physical death. And so life goes on. So it does give people a lot more strength in maybe their own beliefs or lack thereof of the eternity of the soul. So, again, you don't have to go through all the trauma of what I did in my NDE to remember who you are. But it could also, it's so versatile in the assistance that I've seen to many of my clientele where, we talk about the subconscious mind and how, sometimes we continue patterns that we're not aware of within our lives, whether that through physical health, whether that through social dynamics, whether that through, our own, kind of patterns of looking at the world, and even, carrying itself over into the mental health arena with trauma that's unresolved in this lifetime. And so, past life regression could give people a lot of understanding the point of origin behind pathology so that they're able to really move forward, as well as a greater understanding as who they are and why they're here in this lifetime, which many refer to as, the soul's purpose or life's purpose.
Now, since you are also a certified clinical social worker, can you work with people virtually? Because I know that during the pandemic, that really opened up the ability to do that, even in non-local ways, like virtually or through other states, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, social work still is a little bit, we're still a little bit hand-tied with some of the state jurisdictional laws within practicing mental health. You could really only see clients, even if they're remote, for mental health if they're in the state of New York, if I'm living in New York usually, even if it's telehealth, which to me, I get it and I don't
I didn't know that because my daughter-in-law is a certified social worker.
I don't want to put anyone in trouble here, but I could be wrong.
No, it could be New York State, but I know during the pandemic that she's in Washington State, but she was absolutely able to legally practice through the entire United States because of a change. So I don't know.
I'm hoping that maybe things have changed. I have to double check the laws. But I see clients, for other stuff from here to Australia. I've got clients in Australia and all over the world. So it's just fascinating that you could be in one place and someone could be in the other side of the screen, and we're all just kind of interested and connected to the same stuff. It's just fascinating, the power of technology and the internet these days. But I do a lot of past life regressions with clients all throughout the world. And, I find that, when they're open, when they let go, the infinite mind will begin to expand and grow. Many times people rather hold on to the ego or how they see themselves in the nature of reality versus letting go to something maybe different than what they're used to seeing. And so, this explores what we view as the unknown, but really in the depths of our mind and our hearts, it is the known. With all our lives that we lived, it's all there, deep within, the inner mind and the heart.
Yeah, I would say with a lot of work that I've done on this level, just personally, it's been really amazing, particularly when my children were young, which, by the way, my son's going to be almost 50 and my daughter's 44.
Wow.
But going through their childhood, and there's always conflicts if any parents have ever raised children.
Sure.
Okay, so I would use past life regression and get some real revelations in terms of experiences and relationships that I have had with those people, my kids, in prior lifetimes, which really helped me support especially challenging aspects of our relationship in this lifetime.
It makes complete sense because many times, there's there's a forgetfulness of a role, and sometimes some kids, maybe they have a parent as their parent in this lifetime, but in another lifetime, they may subconsciously remember them as their own kid. And so, for kids to all of a sudden be on the other side of the alley or a different role, it's hard, but it's all about the karmic wheel and balancing, things out within our soul family. But you're right, it's so pivotal to really explore.
So wait a minute, you're using
who we are.
vocabulary words that I know, but perhaps our audience doesn't know. So
Yes.
go back and let's talk about the karmic wheel and soul families.
So soul family, you kind of like think of it like a stage of life where you reincarnate, with the same actors on the stage, but they may play different roles. And throughout many lifetimes, we reincarnate with the same actors, yet they're in different roles. And so each person has just kind of like a different role to feel. And the term karmic wheel is really about the balance act, and just kind of working out, some of the differences or to find, harmonization between yourself and those that you reincarnate within your soul group. And I use the term soul family because I do believe we all are a part of one soul family, but this is more so in specific to your unique, nuclear soul family, which, from, early on in time, you just have a group that you reincarnate with. The reasons for it, it may be different, but to me at least, it's a similar energy and expression of the divine is how I see it. And there's just a similar energy that you and your soul family members have. It's a wavelength, and I say your vibe attracts your tribe, so it's a vibrational, energy that you're a part of.
That's very nicely put. I think at times almost everyone has experienced that when they're wherever and all of a sudden a person comes into their space and they just recognize them. They don't know like where, they don't really know them personally. I mean, It could be, let's say, a plumber that comes over to fix the plumbing. It could be anybody. They're suddenly there and it's like, wow, this person just looks and feels so familiar.
Absolutely, and how do we explain that if we just meet someone for the first time? And sometimes there's transference. Okay, you give that argument, but sometimes you just meet someone, you just feel like shooting a basketball into an ocean. It's just so free. You could, you just understand each other. It's so liberating. But past life regression has really transformed throughout the decades, and I do credit the work of, the Yale trained psychiatrist Dr. Brian Weiss, who wrote the book, I believe in the late 80s, called Many Lives, Many Masters. But that gave, again, kind of this medical credibility, that this was something kind of real, and, as well as the academic, empirical credibility. But also, for people interested in kind of learning more, I would highly recommend checking out some documentaries that you could find on YouTube, as well as the University of Virginia. And they have a whole, archive case studies of reincarnation and evidential cases of past lives within their case studies. So it's just fascinating how much evidence is being built that this is something real and not woo-woo like it used to be seen.
So if somebody wanted to explore that for themselves or find your books, what would be a really good way to find you?
I do have a website. It's jacoblcooper.com. And you could find my books, both of my books, on Amazon.com, Life After Birth, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. And if you want to make an in-person or remote session, I will be around. And I'm also going to be in Lilydale, which is really, it's been featured on the Oprah Winfrey Network and HBO, but it's the center of spiritualism in the United States. And it's been around for hundreds of years, but basically you have to be a resident medium to be a citizen there. So it's a really, really cool place. I'm going to be presenting there. And
where is
I also
that?
have a brand. So Lilydale is right outside of Buffalo, New York.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, I have heard of that. Mm-hmm.
And it's all just basically mediums who live there and giving talks on the afterlife and readings, and it's kind of like heaven on earth basically. And they say no one ever dies in Lilydale. That's their saying. And I think they made an HBO documentary on that. But so I'm going to be presenting there, and even like presidents like Abraham Lincoln would visit there. I mean, this place has been around for hundreds of years. It's just a fascinating historical place that was also really behind a lot of the women's rights movements as well. So very progressive as well. But also have a YouTube channel called The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, and I have a lot of high prolific authors and celebrities that are going to be coming on and talking about mental health and spirituality on the channel. So that's kind of what I'm up to.
Well, you've certainly taken an experience that happened to you as a child, and instead of greeting it with fear, like some people do sometimes and struggle for years with these kinds of experiences, you embraced it and allowed it to take you forth into both your professional and your creative life.
Yeah, I think there's a beautiful quote by, I believe, the Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel, and I could be wrong, but he said, God made us because God loves stories. And so many people, have, life stories defining their lives. And I think our job is really to define and make sense of the story and to be the author of our own lives. And, I wrote 2 books technically, but you don't have to write a book to be an author. You could find ways to interpret through wisdom and intelligence and awareness to really make sense and find meaning past even the most difficult moments that come to the surface in life.
Yeah, that's really true. And it's great that you were able to also incorporate your profession and build in the knowledge that you have about these esoteric topics as well.
Yeah, they're all related. I think, in the New Age spirituality, we say we're multidimensional beings. But from a mental health perspective, I view that we're not just our bodies. We have emotions, we have psychological makeup, social dynamics, family roles. So we have so many different parts of ourselves. So it's important to be self-aware, of all of our roles and all the gears within ourselves, to find ways to really maximize that. But it really starts with self-awareness, which really is a part of the brain. I mean, people go to therapy and who meditate actually have more developed prefrontal cortex, which is really related within the brain to self-awareness. So, go to therapy if you really want to improve your brain and your self-awareness, but you could also meditate too. And it's an amazing gift when we're living life in a state of awareness.
It is, and also causes much less pain and challenge. Because I know for me, after living that same way all these years, it's getting to be a lot of years, when things that come up that other people experience as challenging, I kind of just watch it. It doesn't affect my baseline, which stays the same in good times and bad. It's just this same rig.
That is so needed. Because, I think really it's the foundation that we're on that really defines our life. The winds, especially in the winds are the strongest, we need to find a solid foundation. I think that's so pivotal, but also to learn how to be the observer of life and not the absorber. I'll say that again, the observer of life, which is what you're describing, and not the absorber, which every little thing happens, and that's, what we feel. So really having discernment as to how do we find space between, life stimuli and what happens to us and how we interpret and respond to it.
Well, thank you so much, Jacob Cooper, for being our guest today on Herbally Yours.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in to Herbally Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamai, at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.